Good morning all, and those who will be seeing this video later, welcome to another session of Stroke Support India Warrior Chats, where we talk with the stroke affected and how they are thriving and making strong efforts in spite of the adversities, in spite of the problems they have faced and they might still be facing. So I'm happy to have here with me Letisha Living and Clive Kempson today. Letisha has, of course, been moderating these and chats for some time now, and she wrote a book called Finding Yourself After Stroke, which is a world-first compilation of about 26 stroke survivors. And it's a great effort. I've been seeing it on the net also. It's a great effort, Letisha, and of course with us also. She has been managing this chat now for several weeks. So thank you very much for all your efforts, Letisha, I must say that. And we also have Clive here today. Clive is coming in from Melbourne, Australia, and had an ischemic stroke when he was about 52 years of age. So over to you, Letisha and Clive. I'll be somewhere in the background and we'll come back later at the end of the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hadi, for that great intro. And I just want to mention Clive is also one of the co-authors in the book Finding Yourself After Stroke, and I am absolutely honoured to have him here today to chat with us about his experience as a stroke survivor and all of the experiences that he went through that brought him into being the person that he is today, and how much that he's giving back to the stroke community, not just here in Australia, but overseas as well. So thank you for joining us today, Clive.
Thank you.
So tell us, for everybody who doesn't know you, who was Clive before your stroke? Who were you? What were you doing? What did your life look like?
I was a very different person before the stroke. I was running my own business in electronic security. I was married, had 2 stepdaughters, had a holiday house. So life was reasonably good. The business was progressively getting better. It had been running for 2 years. So we'd spent a lot of time building the business up. I had no idea of stroke or what it was. Well, I had an idea of what it was, but no idea of the symptoms or what I should have been looking for. So yeah, I've been married more than once. Before the stroke, life was reasonably good. Then the stroke occurred and life changed.
So tell us about that day when the stroke occurred. What were you doing on that day? Did you feel different? Did you realize that anything was happening? What was life for you on the day of your stroke?
So on the day of the stroke, and I'll talk 7 years ago, where my mind was at compared to what I look back on. I had been to work. I was driving home on the freeway. I felt tired, so I pulled over. I got a coffee. I didn't feel right, but I didn't. Stroke was probably not even in my thoughts. I just thought I was tired, so I continued home. I was doing some work on the computer. My right hand wasn't cooperating. So I rang my then wife and said to her, I'm going to go and lie down and have a sleep until she gets home from work. So when she got home from work, she was a lot more concerned about it than I was. A typical stubborn middle-aged man. I didn't really want her to call an ambulance. So here in Australia, we have a service called Nurse on Call. So she rang the nurse on call, who then spoke to me and called an ambulance on my behalf. So I had
What made them call the ambulance, do you think?
She was speaking to me and asking me a lot of questions, and she felt that I needed to go to hospital to be assessed. She wasn't thinking about stroke. I don't think. When the ambulance arrived, the two ambulance officers weren't convinced about stroke either. So they did take me to hospital, but there was no immediate rush because the symptoms for me started halfway through the day, and this was like 7 o'clock in the evening now.
Is that before you were driving in the car? Were you at work or something prior to?
No, it was I'd been to work, so I left at 5:30 in the morning, and we're talking the feeling of being tired or unwell was about 2 o'clock. Obviously, it could have been worse. I was on the freeway doing the speed limit. But yeah, feeling tired and just not feeling right. So I thought it was just tired. So for me, I'm tired, let's have a coffee. That'll give me some stimulation and we'll keep going. So yeah, so the ambulance, the two paramedics that showed up, asked me to do all sorts of lifting my arms in the air, things like that, which I completed fine. But now looking back on it, they didn't ask me to close my eyes, which is would have been a mistake on their part, because when you have no perception, your arms are not, you don't lift your arms both the same. You think you do, but you don't. So they took me to hospital, to the emergency department. They weren't really in any rush either. So I did get to go straight in. From there, it was sort of a bit of a blur for the next sort of hour. And then the doctor came around. I had a drip in my arm. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what drip had in it unless it was just saline. It was just all a big blur. So yeah, and then staying in the emergency overnight was probably not the best place to be. You don't sleep much in emergency. There's too much going on.
Yeah, it's very noisy, all those beeps. And so when you're in the hospital now, was it ever going through your mind, what's happening to me? Did you ever suspect at any time, I think I'm having or maybe having a stroke?
Not at all. Like I say, I didn't really have a good idea of what the stroke was. I didn't know what was going on. I was left in the cubicle all night. They kept coming in and checking me, checking my blood pressure. I was then moved to a side ward on emergency, which is a ward for people that are going to be in all night, to give them a bit more peace. That just made me more anxious, because it meant, for me, it meant a longer stay. So in the morning, a doctor came around and said that they thought I'd had a stroke, although the symptoms looked very mild. So I was transferred to a neuro ward.
And have they given you an MRI or a CT scan or anything by this time?
No.
And were your symptoms deteriorating? Is that how they started suspecting it was a stroke?
Yes, a little bit. So I didn't actually get an MRI or a scan for 6 days. So the story probably gets a bit worse. So the Thursday evening was when I went in. The Friday, I spent most of the day in a neuro ward. I saw an OT and a physio. And at 4 o'clock, the nurse came to me and said, "Oh, the doctor said you can go home," because I was still able to walk. So I rang my wife and said they want to kick me out. So she came in, she quizzed the nurse. Anyway, I went home. So I got home Friday evening, still feeling not right. Went to bed. In the morning when I got up, I was a little bit worse. My arm was not cooperating at all, but I was still able to stand up. Progressively during the day, it got worse, to the point where I couldn't stand up or walk. So it was about, I think it was about 5 o'clock, she decided to ring the ambulance again. So we had the MICA paramedic show up, and he was absolutely disgusted with the hospital for sending me home. He made a couple of phone calls to the hospital, and he organised an ambulance to come and take me back to emergency as a priority to be seen straight away. Obviously, any sort of preventative measures by the hospital were outside of any time windows. So I was again in emergency all night.
So you've gone to hospital on a Thursday, then they've discharged you home, and then you've gone back to hospital again on the Saturday.
Yep.
But by now you've really deteriorated. You know something is going wrong, and you want to know what's going on.
I did. It was like going back on the Saturday was the start of 8 weeks in hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Still not much communication from any doctors or anybody like that. Obviously, it's Saturday evening by now. They're probably all gone out to dinner and things like that. So in emergency all night, taken to a side ward in the morning where I had to wait and see a speech therapist to do a swallowing reflex test and make sure that I was speaking okay, but make sure I could swallow food and drink, and before I could go to the ward. So I did that, and then I moved to the neuro ward again in a different bed. But nothing really happened on the Sunday because it's Sunday and the doctors obviously weren't at work, and the therapists don't work Sundays. So it was a case of just sitting and being bored. Actually, had I not had my phone, I think I would have been going crazy. So yeah, so Sunday was boring, nothing going on, scared, unsure of what was going to happen, not knowing what.
No answers.
No answers, still no scans. Obviously, I actually didn't go for an MRI till the Wednesday.
Wow.
So yeah, so Monday morning came and the doctor came around and said, you've had a stroke, but couldn't confirm it. But the fact I couldn't walk, I couldn't use my arm, my speech was not right, but wasn't to a point where I couldn't communicate. So the OT and the physio came back to the ward again. The OT was a real bossy boots, and I mentioned that in the book, but I also say it to her face now because we're friends now. She was a lot more informative than any of the medical staff about what had gone on. She got me out of bed on that first morning and made me stand up. She actually ended up making me do squats at the end of the bed with physio, explaining that the big muscles return function a lot quicker. So we did that on the Monday. I saw the doctor in the morning, but nothing else.
Is that on the Wednesday? Are we at Wednesday now?
We're on Monday at the moment.
Yeah.
I asked about scans and the nurse didn't have any idea. So Monday went on, Tuesday came around, the same thing, just OT and physio and not much else. Wednesday morning came around and the nurse came in and said, "Oh, you're going for an MRI." So having not had an MRI before was a very intimidating experience. Anybody that's had an MRI on their brain, it's not a nice place to be. So yeah, so I got put in the MRI machine. I was in there for 45 minutes, very noisy, very claustrophobic. And obviously the results from the MRI were I had an ischemic stroke of a clot in the left side of my brain, which has affected my right side even right up till today.
So that's quite a long time that you went without diagnosis, and I completely understand that too. Mine was the same. I had my stroke event on the Thursday night, and it wasn't until Monday when I had the MRI, and then Tuesday when the neurologist came to see me. So you've got all of these days knowing something's wrong, not knowing what's wrong, but never suspecting as a young person that you've had a stroke.
Yep.
So when they finally told you that you'd had a stroke, like how did you respond to that? Was it were you because it had been almost a week for you, were you thinking by this time I could have had a stroke, or was this news?
I think by that time I'd come to terms with the fact that I'd had a stroke because the OT had been so good. The neurologist came around and explained that I'd had an ischemic stroke and it was on the left. I'd had a basal ganglia. Like, why can't they speak in terms that people understand? Fortunately for me, this was on Thursday. Fortunately for me, the OT hadn't been yet, so I had her to look forward to coming in so I can quiz her with lots of questions. So yeah, she was really helpful. She told me it was going to be a long, slow road. It's not going to be a 100-meter dash, it'll be a marathon. They were talking about, so the hospital I went to has 3 different rehab wards in different hospitals. So I said I would like to go to a specific one nearer where I lived. So they told me I would have to stay till Monday because there'll be a bed free on Monday where I wanted to go, which was 5 minutes from home.
Can you tell us, Clive, at this point, what were your post-stroke deficits? So what was happening to your physical body, your speech, your on the affected side?
So I had right side weakness, so I couldn't stand up on my own. My right leg just wasn't cooperating. Just felt like I was going to fall over. My right arm wouldn't move at all. I had speech problems. People that have obviously met me since my stroke don't see that my voice and speech has changed, but my ex-wife has definitely told me that my speech has changed over the time. I had no cognitive issues, which was probably best for me, and obviously no signs of aphasia or anything. So for me, the worst was that I've no use of my right-hand side. I was probably more concerned about my clients and how I was going to get the jobs finished that were on the go, and also needing to explain to 2 contractors that I wouldn't be doing any work for them in the following year when they just awarded me $250,000 worth of work. So there was lots of emotions about, probably more about work and home life than about actually what was happening to me.
And it wasn't just your leg either, was it? It was your arm and hand as well?
Yep, I've got, even today, I I can move my arm, but it's really of no practical use. Although I'm still working on recovery, I've got more use of it for stabilizing and things like that now than I've had in a long time. But at that point in time, no. Had no use of my right arm at all. And not being, wasn't able to stand up on my own for probably nearly 4 weeks. So it was really hard having to ask for help for everything. So yeah.
So how long were you in rehab for?
So I was in acute for 8 days, and then I went to subacute rehab for 6 and a bit weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so subacute rehab was a different hospital. I got transported there. The rehab ward had a gym, physios, OTs, allied health assistants. The nursing staff, I think, were a lot better there, and I think that's because of the type of people in the ward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I got to know the physio and OT, and more so the allied health assistants during my stay there. They told me I'd be there till the end of January, and I told them I'm going home for Christmas, and I walked out 3 days before Christmas.
Yeah.
I walked out the door and sat in a wheelchair, but I walked out the door.
You did it.
Yeah, so, and then that started my rehab journey with community rehab for the next 3 years.
So for the people listening, in Australia, we have a community-based rehab that's called RITH, which is rehab in the home. And that's what you had access to. Is that right, Clive?
So I had access to rehab in home 3 weeks, which was over the Christmas New Year period, because the rehab, community rehab space was closed. Then I went to the community rehab centre, which is still part of the hospital network, where I saw a physio, OT, speech therapist, dietitian, and a social worker.
And was that all part of your discharge planning?
Oh, what is discharge planning? Can you explain that to me, please? There was no discharge planning, and the hospital network I work for, I'm actually on a staff stroke group there, raising lots of issues. And they understand they don't do discharge planning well, but 7 years down the track, they still don't do it well.
Mm.
So yeah. So and then it became more difficult for me because I just saw a comment there about driving. I wasn't allowed to drive. In Australia, you're not allowed to drive for 3 months minimum after a stroke. So having to ask for help and for someone to take me to rehab and pick me up and or get a taxi and things like that was really difficult for me, because I am a very independent person. So I tried my best to overcome that need to ask people. It also made me very well aware who my real friends were. And the people I thought would step up and help didn't. And the people I had no expectations of were the ones that stepped up and offered their help, especially with transport and things like that.
Yeah, and we do hear that quite a lot, that we have these expectations of the people who are in our circle, and we place these expectations on them that they will, be who we want them to be for us and provide the support that we want them to provide for us. And sometimes it's a big surprise when they don't meet that expectation. And you're definitely not alone there. That's something that we hear quite often. I'm just going to go into, we've just had a comment in the chat about community rehab being available to everybody. And in Australia, it really depends on who your therapist is at the time. While you're in hospital and prior to your discharge, there are a lot of people who do fall between the cracks and don't get access to the community support that they need, or what we have in Australia is called NDIS, and a lot of people don't get access to the NDIS and the funding that's available to help them with their therapies. And as we know, therapy is really quite expensive. So I just wanted to mention that.
I think
tell us,
community rehab, also it's about advocating for yourself, and there are so many different people for whatever reason don't advocate for themselves. They need to speak up. There's a diverse culture here with many different languages. You've got people with aphasia, you've got the people that just don't want to rock the boat and speak up against anything. Unfortunately for them, they picked on the wrong person with me. So yeah, so I've been quite good at advocating for myself and others along the journey. So community rehab should be available to everyone, but because people don't speak up, they don't get the services they need.
or they're just not aware that it's there for them.
Yeah, which is part of, for me, discharge planning is part of the stroke guidelines here, and the hospitals need to adhere to the stroke guidelines, which they don't.
I've done community. I'm an OT. Thank you, Clive, for appreciating the OT role. I'm an OT, so I can tell how much I advocate for our patients. And I've done community reentry at one of the hospitals that I used to work. Of course, it closed down. And there are very few programs, even in Los Angeles, who provide that community rehab. As an outpatient therapist, I do advocate for these patients, and I do take them through the process. At times, I'm able to go to their work site and help them set up, but at times not possible. So again.
Yeah, I've been working with an OT in Indiana and one in Tennessee. And yeah, my understanding from there, what they're telling me, I think the US medical system it's all about money. So if you can't afford it or you're not insured, you really don't progress anywhere.
Very true, very true. Insurance is a big chunk of this.
Yeah. So from that side of things, I feel very fortunate that I live in Australia.
So tell us about
your good system. Sorry.
Sorry?
I'm glad that you have a good system in Australia, but the amount of time that was spent with your care in the initial part, that's a little bit mind-boggling, that how much time you spend without getting an MRI or a CT scan. Yeah. That is a little bit disturbing.
Yes, I look back on it now and it is very disturbing.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for young stroke awareness, because you just think, if I had got treatment or that MRI sooner, could my post-stroke challenges not be permanent, or could my therapy have started a lot sooner than it did?
Yes. I think, I think that as well. Like, I think if they even suspect a stroke, it needs to be acted on straight away.
So tell us, Clive, how long you're still in rehab now?
Yep.
You're still ongoing rehab now?
Yes, I still
and
see a physio, an OT, and an exercise physiologist every week that the government pays for. So
that's through the NDIS?
So yes, I'm part of NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Again, I think it's about how we advocate for yourself as to the funding and support you get. So I feel lucky that I get 35 hours per year for physio, 35 hours for OT, and 35 hours for EP. They also pay for a psychologist. I see a psychologist every 3 weeks. And they also actually pay for a podiatrist because I can't manage my own foot care with one hand.
Do you have diabetes on top?
I do have diabetes on top, but they don't cover that because that's not the primary problem.
Right. Yeah.
I've been diabetic for 16 years, so I manage that myself without any problems. So I feel lucky that I've got the funding I've got because I couldn't afford it if it wasn't there by then.
Yeah. And so I'm going to ask a couple of hard questions, if you don't mind. You're welcome not to answer them. We can edit it out later.
You're right.
So when we were talking about you in hospital and you were talking about my then wife, so Clive, who entered hospital, and Clive today, there's been a significant change in relationships. Do you think that your stroke changed the people? How do you feel that the stroke changed the people around you who left you, who came?
Oh, look, I think the best outcome of the stroke is my wife divorced me. I've learned a lot about her that I didn't know about her after being with her for 10 years. So yeah, now I live on my own is probably the best outcome from the stroke. Probably not what I was expecting. There are very few people from my pre-stroke days still around in my life. There are some, but not many. And there's a lot of people around since my stroke that obviously have no expectation about who I was before.
So how long do you think after your stroke that your marriage dissolved?
So it's been 7 years. I've lived on my own for over 4, and we lived in the same house for 6 months after we separated, so 2.5 years. But it was going downhill pretty much from about 6 to 8 months. It was all based around money because I wasn't bringing it in anymore. It also meant she had to go and do some work. And I've learned lots about her since there. Everything in her life is driven by money. The fact that I couldn't bring in the income I was bringing in before was a big factor in that. So yeah, so I think it takes a massive impact on your life to bring out the true colours in people. We still talk, like we sorted everything out amicably. We sorted property out, money out. There was no lawyers involved. We got divorced online. So everything from that side of it was simple. I still talk to her now. I have a great relationship with my stepdaughters as well. And they only live 3 streets away. So having been married more than once, I felt like a failure because it wasn't really what I wanted myself, but that's the way it ended up. So I now live in a lifestyle village for over 50s, where I'm the youngest person here. It's not my ideal place to live, but it's home. I've got everything I need here. I would just like a bigger backyard for my dog, but that's something I can work on later on.
It's just been such a change for you, going from this independent, successful businessman to having a stroke, and then your life just basically falling apart, and then rebuilding yourself and who you are to who you are today. And you're doing incredible things now, Clive. I mean, you can drive again, you can walk again, you're talking again, you're collaborating with therapists, not just in Australia and around the world, and universities as well. Can you share some of what you're doing with the people that are listening?
Yep, and I can actually pinpoint the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. So my whole direction in life has changed to, I suppose, trying to give back and create a better rehab structure for future survivors. I met a professor of OT, and I joined a trial she was doing in upper limb, and we got on really well. And then she asked me to do some more work, and I'm currently chair 2 committees for her. I made connection with 2 OTs in America during lockdown, one of which has started a post-stroke non-profit organisation, which I'm a director of. That's in Chattanooga in Tennessee. So that's given me some new direction. It's given me some positives to try and help what goes on in another country, but by providing free content online. What else have I done? So I work with several different researchers in different unis and different hospitals. I've just been doing some work this week with a senior researcher in Sydney on artificial intelligence in the early stages of rehab where people have issues with aphasia. So, and also that it can be done on telehealth or on the phone because it's an automated question system. So that's still quite a way away from being anywhere near working, but we're working on it slowly. I'm working on a promote trial, which has 24 researchers working on. We've connected with 14 major hospitals up the eastern seaboard, and it's about getting them to implement the stroke guidelines as they are now and not what they think they are, without actually going and looking, because the guidelines here are living guidelines, so they change randomly and they're up to date all the time. So that's a big four-year project. I work with another organisation called Stroke Ed. They provide, most of their content is free online. They're Australian. The lectures are online. They're normally only an hour at a time, but I've worked with them on some upper limb retraining for therapists, being a consumer. So for me, it's about getting that consumer feedback across to the therapists and researchers so that they can think about me rather than think about what they're doing. So one of the committees I'm on is a stakeholder committee where the consumers are in the ground floor directing where the research should be going.
That's just incredible what you're doing. I mean, you're doing a lot, and you're doing a lot to give back for everybody that's come after you. And it doesn't go unnoticed. Like not just here in Australia, but overseas as well. you know, I just get a little bit emotional thinking about it, because I know your story and I know how much you're doing, and you're really understating the amount that you are giving. So, you know, thank you for everything that you do. So besides the clinical things that you're doing, what are some outside of the box alternative things that you have come across that have helped you or seen along the path that may have helped you with your recovery? I know that you've tried, or you are having Botox, and have you tried anything else that's helped you?
Not a medical intervention. I use e-stim quite a bit, especially in my arm and my hand and my fingers. I've been having Botox. I had Botox a couple of weeks ago, which was dose number 19. So, and I had 13 injections, which for me is horrifying because I'm not a needle person. I have been known to pass out while having Botox, which suits my consultant because he finishes while I'm awake, while I'm out of it. e-stim I have found that it's taken a lot of trial and effort to find certain muscles to do certain things. All the literature out there in the world doesn't, everybody's different in their makeup. So I'm pretty comfortable now with doing it at home as well as in therapy. My physio neuro has changed starting in 2 weeks, and from what I'm told, she wants to try e-stim on my leg as well, which I haven't really done a lot of, so that'll be something new to try. What else have I been? I've been to the Gait Lab. I don't know if anybody has an idea of what the Gait Lab is. So the Gait Lab is a specific test, or I suppose they want to get results about how you walk, what your gait is when you're walking, what the limitations are. It's a very technical system. So I've done that twice, and I'm actually going again in January to have another assessment to see the changes that have occurred in the last 4 years, and what they can also give feedback on what your therapist probably needs to work on.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so again, I think I'm fortunate I live in Melbourne because a lot of research gets done from Melbourne. And from my understanding is there are only 2 Gait Labs in public health, and they're both here in Melbourne, in the country. So what else have I done? I've travelled interstate and overseas on my own. I'm a big rugby league fan, so I have travelled for the rugby. I've been to Perth to friends, I've been to New Zealand to friends, and I've travelled a bit, having been to Brisbane for State of Origin rugby and into Sydney as well for grand finals, as well as locally here in Melbourne to follow my own team.
You've just had an amazing journey, and you're really giving a lot back to the community, which, you know, I'm just going to speak on behalf of everyone, we're incredibly grateful for. So tell us, Clive, what would be your top 3 to 5 tips that you would give to people who have had a stroke?
Well, I suppose the biggest one would be try and stay positive. But also, for me, acceptance was a really big thing. I think the earlier in the piece, that you can accept what's happened and that things are really not going to ever be 100% the same, will increase your chances in recovery, because you're not battling the demons in your head when you're doing rehab. Being positive, asking for help, something I'm not very good at. when you need help, there's always someone that's going to help. It's just working out, I suppose, amongst the circle of people in your life, who are the ones that you can rely on and ask for help. You'll get the people that are just step up and do it anyway. But yeah, and with that positive attitude, you've got to realize that it's a long road. It's not a 5-minute thing.
Yeah, I love that. Stay positive, acceptance of where you are now, and asking for help. And even if the people who you expect in your circle aren't meeting your expectations, there is always someone there. There is always someone you can reach out to, even if it isn't within your social circle.
And I suppose the last tip is advocate for yourself. If you're not getting what you want, tell them. Or go looking. When I was discharged, I met this professor of OT. I was online looking for, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was looking for more therapy of some description. And that's how I came across her. There are a couple of websites in Australia that talk about that you can access to find out what trials are on in all medical in Australia. I don't know what there is overseas. So yeah, I think you've got to advocate for yourself, because nobody is going to advocate for you better than you are.
And you can lose yourself in your own internal dialogue, waiting for somebody that isn't coming. So you're right, you really do need to reach out and ask the questions. And if you're not getting the answers, to ask someone else the questions, and to keep going until you find the right support for you.
Yeah. And I think because we've got the medical system we've got here, we're lucky that we can reach out and find supports, whereas I'm sure, I don't know what India is like, but I know in America it's a lot different. And you can't just reach out for a stint of OT or physio, because there's always a money factor involved, whether it's your money or an insurance company's money. Or
yeah, and it is actually the same for me in Australia. I don't have NDIS, so I don't have access to therapy. If I get any therapy, it has to come out of my own personal pocket, and I've got kids that need therapy, so I don't get the therapy, they get it instead of me.
But you can go to your GP and get a referral to the rehab ward. Community rehabbing it a stint of 12 weeks, once a year.
I didn't even know that.
Well, there you go. I would say Simone Russell's probably your best contact.
Yeah.
Stroke Foundation, because she's an OT as well.
Yeah.
And she's very informative. But yeah, you should be able to get a stint of 12 weeks of, you would get 1 hour a week with an OT and physio for 12 weeks.
Awesome. So we'll close off shortly. So anything else that you would like to add, or do you think there's anything we've missed out, or anything that you would like the listeners to know about you, your stroke experience, your rehab experience, what you're doing now? Any other tips you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. I just like advocating for yourself, and for me, getting mental health support is something that I think is lacking in this country.
Yeah.
But it should be a priority in stroke recovery as well as physical, because every stroke survivor is suffering from some sort of mental health about what's happened.
Totally agree with you there. Well, thank you so much, Clive, for coming on today and chatting with us about your stroke experience. We appreciate and value your time and all of the insights that you've shared with us.
Yep. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Letisha, Clive, and of course, Poonima also for being in. I've been listening, and yes, every such chat takes us into different dimensions, different directions. One learns also. What was of interest to me, what initially was, and we increasingly, we hear it almost invariably. People in India, of course, we hear it. People don't know much about stroke. They go to a hospital. The hospital also doesn't know much about stroke. Treatment is delayed. Somewhere in India, I can imagine that we are a huge country. There is always a paucity of resources, even in the best of hospitals. There is crowds and all that. And of course, awareness is very, very limited. But when I hear some like this happening in, let's say, in Australia, that for days stroke is not diagnosed, what do you think are the reasons for that? Is it paucity of resources? Is it paucity of information, even at the medical community level? I mean, why does that happen there?
So mine was 7 years ago. Things definitely have changed in that time with diagnosis. Luckily for me, or for people in Melbourne metro area, we have a dedicated stroke ambulance, which has a neurologist, a pharmacist, an imaging person, and a portable CT scanner on board. So if you're lucky, if you're in the metro area, you can get care pretty much straight away, and they can even inject the thrombolytic drug on board on the way to hospital. I am aware that obviously that's a one-off, although I have seen in America they've got stroke ambulances that are connected with the fire departments. I've seen 2 different ones now. Care has got better. The hospital I was in now has 2 dedicated stroke wards for clot retrieval, and they're going to do somewhere in the, or projected for the next calendar year, 300 clot retrievals. So I think that in that time, there's been a lot of change and improvement. A lot more still needs to be done. But in the in-hospital setting, I think they've got better. It's more in rehab and therapy areas that the continued level of rehab needs to continue.
Okay. And you also mentioned about other clear guidelines on how to manage stroke, which the people are aware of, and if one does not obey those guidelines, let's say a medical person, are there any consequences to that person?
No, because there are only guidelines.
Okay, so there are.
So they're not legislated, or they're not part of the medical framework. They are literally guidelines. And truly, I don't think a lot of the therapists and doctors even look at them. Okay. So, and they're freely available for anybody anywhere in the world to look at.
I believe just through the thousands of people that I've spoken to that are stroke survivors all over the world, that it really comes down to who you're in front of. So when you're presenting in front of a doctor or in the hospital, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's who you're presenting in front of. Yep. What is their perception of you? What is their projections? What is going through their mind? How are they perceiving you? And from then, that's when it begins. And I think it really doesn't matter where you are in the world. It just comes down to who you present in front of and how they handle it and take it from there.
Yeah, I agree. I was reading a post through an OT in the States that I'm doing some work with today, and an OT had put a question up about the fact that I've been rotated to a stroke recovery ward. Has anybody got any tips on upper limb rehab? And we're talking a qualified OT here, and I'm thinking, I really wouldn't want to be on that ward, because this person has got obviously no idea about upper limb rehab. And I think that's wrong. Like, you shouldn't be thrown into something that you know nothing about.
Absolutely. But you see, that's where it is. I would imagine, again, see, as a consumer, just as a layman, I would imagine that when I reach a hospital, exhibiting certain symbols, the people sitting in front of me at least will be, even if it's a false alarm, at least will think of these possibilities. Even if it turns out to be wrong, that this could be a evolving stroke, and particularly if there are guidelines. And I wonder what happens, if I mean, I don't know whether it has been tested anywhere, at least not in India, as far as I know, that one reaches a hospital with an evolving stroke, but it is not diagnosed for one day. Does it amount to an act of, say, medical negligence?
I would really like to see that. I mean, I'm the same as Clive. I on Thursday, my symptoms began. I had a home doctor come to my house and give me pain medication. The next day, I went to a medical centre. I saw another doctor. I was given more pain medication. 2 days later, I went to another doctor, and it was that third doctor that said, "Oh, I think you need to go to hospital." And yeah, I do. I agree. Could it be medical negligence, or is it that they need more training? And I think that's where I come in as a consumer and an advocate for stroke awareness, that not every stroke presents the same. And we just need to keep speaking and having these conversations and getting this dialogue out, that it does present differently. And we need to be heard. Our concerns need to be heard.
The problem being here in Australia is medical negligence requires 2 independent doctors to write letters about the doctor that saw you. I'm sorry, you're never going to get that happen.
No, yeah, I hear you, because even in India, they would, I mean, since I am involved into some of these situations, pretty much similar. Humans are the same everywhere. I can only say that, Clive, getting such kind of issues out. But, that's where it is. Why can't it be tested on the anvil of, there are trained people after all. Even if they go wrong, of course, it's not a perfect science. But what is the worst situation? That, okay, it was not a stroke. The diagnostics were done, the MRI was done, it was not a stroke. So that is a much better situation to be in, rather than to ignore it for days and then say that, oh, yes, probably it was evolving 3 days ago.
Yeah.
So that is, but as you rightly said, in India also, and in Australia for sure, and we are seeing changes now. There is more awareness happening. With efforts like the stroke associations in Australia and in India and elsewhere. But yes, a lot more is to be done. We have an ongoing survey on our website. We ask people, whoever joins in, I guide them to the survey. That, did you know anything about stroke when it was happening to you? For example, that's one of the questions.
Yeah. And
most of the people had no clue. Then when you reach the hospital, did they realize what was happening to you? And again, more than 60–70% people said, I think if I remember correctly, they say that no, it took them time. So that is something that needs to be turned around, and I believe there are now efforts done, even educating the ambulance drivers, for example, to realize that it could be a possible stroke and then move faster accordingly. So one can only, hope for the best as one goes forward. The other issue that I was also hearing when you talking about, talked about NDIS. What is that, NDIS? talked about? Is that as an insurance scheme?
It's the National Disability Insurance Scheme, but it's a government-funded scheme. So you have to, and it's not just stroke, obviously, it's disability in any form, and fulfilling a certain criteria, and then they work out supports, funding for therapy, social supports. I actually get a cleaner once a week because I have issues getting down on my knees. So predominantly she's here to do the floors and the showers and things like that. You can get core supports for a support worker to be with you, to take you out shopping or for social events. Obviously, I'm only aware, I only deal in that stroke area, but I know other people that get someone that's just had a new wheelchair funded by it because they needed it. So there's a whole array. I think last year they spent $4 billion on it. And
every citizen is entitled to it, or like Letisha was saying, you have to pay something to become part of the scheme?
They say that everybody is entitled to it. I've been knocked back twice, and I've got 2 children with special needs, and they've both been knocked back as well. Yeah, it's one of those things that definitely needs an overhaul, and it definitely needs some more work done on it. It definitely needs some improvement. But if you do get accepted, it can be absolutely life-changing for you. You can, like Clive said, you can have your physiotherapy, your speech therapy, your occupational therapy. You can have people come and say, I can't drive and I have children. It would be so beneficial to me to have a support worker come and take us out to our appointments and things like that. But not everybody gets it. But if you do get it, it is.
But why would someone not get it? Are there any criteria for it? Like,
yes,
there's a criteria. Mm-hmm.
There is a criteria. Yeah. I also personally, I also think it all comes down to who you're dealing with at the NDIS, how much information you're giving them from the people that are supporting you, so your therapists. Obviously, I feel fortunate. I got in, it's only been around for about 4.5, 5 years here in where I live. And I got in on the ground floor, I got in early, and now I'm part of it. Like, I get it for life. My supports will change over that period. My therapy will get reduced, I'm sure. So yeah.
For sure, that's a great help because, as you rightly said, Clive, Letisha, everything basically boils down to money. Wherever you are, for that matter,
Yeah.
US or here or in Australia. So any support that one can get on these aspects, I'm sure it's a very, very strong help. Unfortunately, in India, we simply don't have anything like this, to begin with. We don't have any, except for some very, very minor expenses that one, or facilities that one gets consequent to becoming disabled. Even insurance policies, or even though if you are prepared to pay for them, now they are evolving and slowly encompassing, stroke aspects, but again, in a very, very limited manner. Like if I'm insured, I will probably get physiotherapy support maybe for the next 90 days. Then that's it. I'm on my own. So yes, any support that you are getting, is wonderful. And of course, I was also struck by, and we see that again, invariably, many people, the way that you found new purpose, Clive, I think is wonderful, of becoming an advocate, of getting involved with research and communities worldwide. Because I think that's extremely important. Either you can give in, one can surrender that, okay, God's will, or one can say that, okay, what do I do? How do I progress, from these lemons that I have now? So I think to that extent, finding purpose is extremely important. And that is what we strive for, in chats such as these and, groups, etc. And it is wonderful to have people like Letisha, Clive, even Purnima, who has joined in now. And there are many others on our groups. And I come across many on Facebook, or another social media groups also who are doing wonderful work. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. Great chatting up. And of course, a lot of messages here and experiences taken from here. So thank you, everyone. I will close the meeting now. And
Thank you.
we'll meet in touch again. All the best, Clive. And we'll
Be in touch.
and Purnima.
All right.
Purnima, you want to say something here, and just in passing, if you have any?
Just saying thank you, for letting me in any way I can help out. I mean, I do a lot of consultation on the videos. Even in India, I just recently volunteered to do a 3-day workshop in a very small town, and they have set up a very nice rehab in a small village. I mean, it's a very small area in Gujarat. So I did a 3-day workshop training a lot of physical therapists. In India, a lot of OTs also do PT. They don't address the ADL aspect of getting people independent. So which I'm really promoting, that you have to focus on decreasing the burden of care. I am a big advocate on that. The family members are crushed under the burden of taking care of the person who is, and sometimes people are able to do things on their own. It's just that they have not been guided through. So that gives them a reason to be up and moving around. So I advocate a lot on making the person independent as much as possible.
Yeah, and you have been coming on to our sessions also, Purnima, I know. And certainly let's develop that further, whatever we can do within our own means. I think it will be a strong help. So thank you very much. And of course, I'll be in touch with you also, Purnima. Let's take this.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you all. And I'm closing the meeting now. All
right.
safe. All the best.
No worries.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.